Are you thinking about sitting for the GAMSAT? In this video we'll break down how the GAMSAT's structured. I'll share some tips on how to get started and how to prepare for the GAMSAT, and also some resources to get you started on your studies. Hey, my name's Adam, I'm a junior doctor from Australia, and I actually sat the GAMSAT twice, once in my second last year of my undergraduate degree and once in my final year as well. And throughout both those attempts I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do, and since then I've helped countless students in preparing for their own GAMSAT sittings as well. But firstly, what actually is the GAMSAT? The GAMSAT's a standardized test used for admission into graduate entry medicine, optometry, dentistry and other health-related professions, primarily in Australia and the UK. It comprises of a reading comprehension humanities section, an essay writing section, and finally a multiple choice sciences section as well. In the most recent sitting of the GAMSAT, the first humanities section comprised of 62 questions in 92 minutes, with an additional 8 minutes of reading time. In the second essay section, you have 1 hour to complete 2 writing tasks with an additional 5 minutes of reading time. And on test day, you'll then have an hour-long lunch break before returning for the final section, the science multiple choice question test, where you'll have 142 minutes to complete 75 questions with an additional 8 minutes of reading time. So back to my own GAMSAT journey. So I mentioned I sat the GAMSAT twice, for the first time in my second last year of my undergraduate degree. And for me, this attempt felt very much like a trial run. And I know that might sound ridiculous, but I know for a fact that there are probably going to be a whole lot of you watching it in the same position as I was. In reality, it got to test day and I just hadn't properly prepared as much as I could have. But as I said before, you learn from those experiences and you learn what you can do better for the next time. And in preparing for the second attempt, I literally sketched out a proper plan of how I would prepare for the GAMSAT. In contrast to the first time sitting it, where I really hadn't done a whole lot of structured practice, I really outlined what I wanted to achieve. I set out a plan over the summer before sitting the GAMSAT in the March sitting, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do to prepare and get my knowledge base up for the exam. And in doing that, I was able to score sort of around the 96th percentile, which was good enough to get me an interview and help get me a place into medicine the year after. And I know it might sound really obvious, but I'm a firm believer that if you put the time in, you can really improve in these sorts of tests. Now, obviously there are going to be people who sit the test for the first time, do really well, and get into the degree that they were hoping to get into. I'm obviously not one of those people, but that's completely fine. And to be honest, for a whole lot of you sitting out there who might feel a bit disheartened by the process, I probably came into the GAMSAT sitting period in my final year, and my GPA wasn't necessarily sky high, and there was a bit of like pressure almost that I really needed a good GAMSAT score to help me get there. And even if you aren't coming through on 7.0 GPA or whatever you might be aiming for, or whatever you might have, I think with the GAMSAT there's definitely an opportunity to boost your score, so to speak, and boost your application. But also, even if that's not the case and you don't score as high as you wanted to in the GAMSAT, there's plenty of opportunities to better your scores and better your application in the years to come. So the GAMSAT has sittings in March and September of each year, and for Australians the March sitting can be used for the application process for the next year. So if you're sitting the March 2023 sitting, you can use that score for the 2024 application period. If you sit it in September, however, you'll only be able to use it for the 2026 application, because you're only going to be getting your scores towards the end of that year and therefore can only use that score in next year's kind of process. Now, there are going to be plenty of you at different stages of your GAMSAT preparation journey. Hopefully we can make this process a little bit easy for you in knowing where to get started, but I think no matter where you are in that timeline, 6 months out or a week out, there are things that you can do to prepare yourself better for the test and hopefully get you a few extra marks on the day. And I think it's really hard to say what the perfect amount of time to prepare would be. I spent about 3 months over the summer before the March sitting. And I think you could spend less than that and do really, really well, obviously. And I think you could spend more than that, although I'd probably also just keep in mind that it is a long preparation period and you want to pace yourself so you don't feel burnt out come exam day. But I think for me, the most important thing over those 3 months was consistency, and that would probably be my first tip. For me, each section of the GAMSAT almost required a different section of my brain to prepare for it and to study for it. For example, if on a given day I was to dedicate 2 to 3 hours to study, I might spend an hour and a half, 2 hours writing an essay and revising it, and then the rest of the time might be spent reading up on some science topics or answering some science practice questions. Whereas the next day I might spend a couple hours doing some humanities practice questions or reading up on those topics, and then maybe focusing a bit on the science stuff. So I'd break down each section into allotted time slots, and that really helped me prepare for those sections independently and stay focused throughout. When starting out, the next best tip I can probably give is starting slow. Spend a little bit of time trying to grasp the theory for each section. For example, when I first started out, I probably spent a while trying to get the structure of my essay right and what I wanted to do. For the science section, for example, I spent a bit of time trying to get an understanding of the physics style questions and some of the questions that I found particularly difficult, getting a bit of a knowledge base before going straight into lots of practice exams, for example. And obviously don't get too bogged down in the theory of everything, but for example, with the essay section, I would start writing essays and it would take me maybe an hour and a half to write a single essay. And then I'd slowly try and chop that time down and eventually get it down, maybe an hour, 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and that looks slightly less crap every time. And then eventually you get it down to the time that you want to. And I'll make a video about essay writing and structuring in the future, but definitely want to start slow, build your confidence, and have a bit of patience. Now to the juicy part, scores. Everyone wants to know, what score do I need in the GAMSAT to get into medicine, to get into dentistry, to optometry, or whatever you want to get into? And I'll probably start with the cop-out answer, which is there is no definitive score to getting into whichever course, because there are a lot of different factors at play here. However, let's quickly touch on scoring and what your chances are with a particular score and what that score actually means in the context of the GAMSAT. When completing the GAMSAT, you'll get 4 scores, a score for each of the 3 sections, as well as a total score, which will then be used for your application. These scores are considered raw scores, so they're not directly a percentile of where you sat amongst all the other test sitters, but they can be plotted against a percentile curve. So for example, your scorecard could look like this, and in the March 2022 sitting, the percentile graphs look something like this. So if you were to score, for example, a 60, that might be equivalent to about a 60 percentile, so you'd be in the top 40% of test sitters. If your score was about a 65 raw score overall, you might be sitting at about sort of the 83, 84 percentile, and a 70 would be equal to about the 95th, 96th percentile of test takers. So that gives you a rough idea of what each of the scores mean, and I guess how difficult it might be to get a particular score based on everyone else sitting the exam. So when it comes to getting into universities, there are obviously a lot of factors at play. For example, your GPA, and GAMSAT scores can vary slightly between different universities. Almost, if not all universities, will use a cutoff of 50 for each section in the GAMSAT. So whilst there's no definitive pass or fail mark, typically if you don't get a score above 50 in each of your 3 sections, you won't be eligible by most universities in Australia. And there are also other factors at play here. Depending on which university you apply for, you might be eligible for bonus points. These are things like for financial difficulties. So for example, if you're in Australia and you're a student that's received Centrelink for over a certain amount of time, you might be eligible for a bonus from your particular university for that. You might be eligible for bonuses for having studied at that particular university in the past, or having reached a certain level of education. For example, if you've had a master's or a PhD in the past, you might get a particular bonus point from that university. Other bonuses might include if you've grown up or lived in a rural or regional area for a certain amount of time. And for example, in medicine, there are a certain amount of spots set aside for students from these areas, and they can be allocated to one of these spots. So each of these bonuses vary between universities, but they can dramatically alter your chances for getting into some universities over others. So it's worth taking a look at the GEMSAS admissions guide to see what bonuses you might be eligible for and what the different universities are offering. And it's also pretty natural to want to know what scores students have got in the past to get a spot at different universities. If you check out forums like Paging Doctor, there are often students that post about their scores and what offers they've been given over the year. And I think typically they also release an Excel spreadsheet after each admissions period showing every student that's posted a score on their website and what university they've been given a spot at. So that can be useful to go through and get a bit of an idea about where you sit and what your chances might be. Obviously, it's not a completely comprehensive list and it doesn't tell you exactly what your chances are, but it can give you a bit of an indication. Lastly, here are a few resources to get you on your way. There are a few free and paid resources that are available for studying. People and students often ask me, is it worth it buying some of these GAMSAT tutoring courses, because they can be quite expensive? And I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. It obviously depends a lot on your personal situation. I think the bottom line for me is that these courses won't guarantee you a really high score. Some of them offer some really good content and resources to get you started and almost act like a bit of a syllabus on the different things that you might want to know and learn about before sitting the GAMSAT, but they don't replace the work that you put in after hours or outside of these scheduled tutoring lessons to prepare for the GAMSAT. And I think that's what a lot of people might miss, is that they think that if they buy one of these courses, then it will guarantee them a good score. And I think that that's just not true. Your best weapon to getting in will be preparing on your own time. And I think that these courses can definitely help with that, but they're not a complete replacement for studying it. One of these companies is called Phrases. If you're watching this video, you might have already heard of them. They're one of the bigger tutoring companies for the GAMSAT. But this is actually one of the free resources that they offer, which I think is fantastic. It's a quote bank which you can use if you're preparing for the essay section. So the essay section, you'll get a series of quotes for each of the 2 essay tasks. Phrases website, which I'll link below, will basically generate random quotes for you to get going off and to use in your practice. So I think that's a really useful resource. In my preparation, I used a book called Des O'Neill, and this might be showing my age a little bit because the book itself was outdated when I started preparing for the GAMSAT, but it actually is a really useful guide. If you can find one on Gumtree or Facebook Marketplace, it can be a little bit expensive, but I think it gives a really good overview of some of the science topics in particular for physics and getting your head around that. And it does have a lot of practice questions and multi-choice questions that you can use. And I found that their essay guide was actually really useful in learning how to structure the different essays for each of the 2 writing tasks. But again, that might be a little bit outdated, so maybe do your own research on that one. Another useful resource which you'll get with your registration is a practice test from ASA, which is the company that runs the GAMSAT, and that's a really good litmus test of what the kind of questions they'll be asking on the day are. And there's also the option to buy additional practice papers from ASA if you feel like you want to have a bit more of a go before exam day. Lastly, if you know anyone that's sat the GAMSAT before, that's done particularly well in the GAMSAT, you can always ask them for assistance and get tips on what they felt helped them on the day, whether it be answering multiple choice questions or an essay writing. I know in the past I reached out to students who had sat the GAMSAT in the past that I knew, and I just asked them whether or not they'd be alright with me sending them some of my practice essays to look through, and I can almost guarantee you that if you ask someone like that, they'll be happy to say yes and look through some of your essays and give you some feedback. Likewise, if you have any questions about the exam or in general, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And also, if you found any other great resources that you've used along your studies, let the rest of us know as well, and write in the comments. Lastly, I'll be posting some more GAMSAT and admissions related content soon, so be sure to subscribe to the channel, and feel free to give this video a like as well if you found it helpful. I also know that GAMSAT material can be quite expensive, so in the future I'm hoping to post some free resources for students to use on this channel, so feel free to follow along. And if there's anything in particular you want me to cover or go over, or any resources you'd like me to make, feel free to let me know as well. But otherwise, I hope this video was helpful and look forward to seeing you guys next time.